Chess players often have confidence issues. Whether you're an amateur, a beginner, or even an established player, we all suffer from confidence issues from time to time. When we play against someone higher rated than us, we often feel like we cannot win this game, we will struggle so much, and it will be a very tough game for us. And if we play against someone our rating or lower, we will feel this urge, this need to win, to prove our rating, and we also don't want to lose the rating. So when we don't win against those players our rating or lower, we often feel like we are terrible chess players and it hurts our confidence a lot. In this video, I'll be showing you a game that I recently played in the Dutch League, where not only I will be explaining every single move, but I will also be explaining my mental throughout the game. What was going through my mind? How did I feel? And how a loss made me feel more confident than ever, despite having confidence issues. Let's take a look at this game. In this game, I was playing with the black pieces against Maarten Strijbos. Before I take a look at the game, let me quickly explain you the situation and where this game is from. This game is from the Dutch League, and the Dutch League is a competition between clubs where there's a team of 10 players facing another team of 10 players. And the team's goal is to win the match, of course, and there's 10 different boards. So every single board matters. The rounds are not happening in 1 week, or there's not multiple rounds in a weekend or something. These rounds are happening one by one, and we have approximately 1 round per month. In total, 9 rounds. Now you can probably already imagine how important every single game is. As a chess player that hasn't played many tournaments recently, and it's been a while since I played my last chess tournament, every single game in the Dutch League mattered a lot to me. Not only because I'm representing a team and it's a team competition, but I also value my own rating a lot, and these games affect my confidence a lot. Up until this point, I had 6 points out of 8, which I was really happy about. Every single win felt so smooth and I was having a lot of fun. I mean, winning is a lot of fun, but I didn't really have confidence still. I was going into this game still feeling quite a lot of pressure, and I only wanted to see myself win. I could not accept losing. So that was pretty difficult for me mentally, as I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself and I put a lot of emphasis on the rating. I have to note that going into this round, I didn't have any norm chances anymore. Despite having a performance rating of 2400, which is sufficient for a WGM norm usually, it was really impossible for me to get a norm, regardless of the result. Because of the lack of titled players I faced, I should be playing against 5 titled players in order to have a chance to have a norm. But I only faced 3, and 2 of them were, so one was Grandmaster, the other one was International Master, and I needed to face another International Master or Women Grandmaster, which I didn't. So I had no chances whatsoever to go for a norm, but still I was very proud of my performance. One final thing before we really get into the game. There is no preparation whatsoever, guys. You don't know beforehand who you're facing. There is no prep. If you're really dedicated, you can check all the players of the team and study their openings, I guess, but there's also a chance that they have replacements and then all your prep was for no reason at all. So usually I don't really prepare for such events. I just go into the game and see what happens. Without further ado, let me show you what happened in my game. My opponent started with the move e4. I was really happy to see that my opponent played move e4 because the day before I had some sort of prep, not really, but I guess it still counts. We are watching some videos about the French, some common patterns in the French, the pawn structures and such. So it was really awesome to be able to play the French once again, and also having seen some more insights about this opening. So of course, e6. And here my opponent actually started spending some time. He spent around 1 or 2 minutes. He didn't play the second move immediately. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this person is not going to play one of the main moves, especially not d4. Why? Because usually people play the second move really quickly. Even if they are surprised or they didn't expect this move whatsoever, they will always go for the main lines pretty quickly. They don't want to show that they're out of book or simply not prepared for this. So they usually play pretty quickly, but my opponent spent some time here, which was really interesting. And after the thought, he went for the move b3, which is very unusual. It rarely happens. I don't think I've ever seen this in my OTB games ever. I may have had this in some of my online games, but you throw away those online games really easily and you don't really care about opening as long as you win, right? At least for me, I don't put too much attention on my online games, which I should, but that's what happens when you're a streamer, I guess. So yeah, I saw this move and I thought, well, I guess I am out of poke on move 2 already. I have no idea what to do, but of course, I'm a French player. I know the ideas more or less, regardless of what happens, so I should be able to handle this. I just played a move d5. I guess on the second move, you can almost always pre-move d5 in the French. I mean, of course, if they play move like bishop b5, that's not possible, but that's the most silly move probably in the French. So d5 works almost always in the French. Bishop b2 was played, and my opponent is simply giving up the pawn on e4. Now, of course, as my opponent is playing this quickly, and he obviously knows sort of what he's doing, right? If he goes for such a line. So I figured maybe taking on e4 is not the best move. Of course, I was calculating the move d takes e4, but after knight c3 and then queen e2 and some activity from the white pieces, I didn't really like going into this line. I had no idea how to develop my pieces, and this feels like very unfamiliar territory for me, especially because of this bishop on b2. I feel like I don't want this bishop to be free over here. I want it to be challenged a little bit. So I wanted to try to keep the position closed, just like any other French player wants, I guess. And I played the move knight f6, attacking the pawn, challenging it, letting it decide if it wants to move forward or take my pawn on d5, which would lead to a sort of strange French exchange variation. But I expected my opponent to play move e5, which he did, knight fd7, f4, c5, and this is all very standard in the French. White is expanding on the king side and black is expanding on the queen side. So what is interesting about this position is that there's a bishop on b2. Usually in the French, you don't see a bishop on b2 because, well, it is staring down this pawn on e5, which is not moving anywhere for the time being. So you don't really see this bishop on b2. Another reason why you don't see the bishop on b2 is because typically in the French, there's a pawn on d4 to strengthen the pawn on e5. But once again, it's not there. So this feels really odd, and I immediately felt like something should be better for me here. The position should be fine for me, more than fine, and I felt pretty confident in this situation, but at the same time, I didn't really know what to do precisely, so I still had to come up with the ideas on the board and see if they work in this very position. So my opponent played knight f3, I played knight c6, simply developing the pieces. Here my opponent went for the move bishop b5, which is really interesting, and let me explain you why. So, of course, we all know that in the French, there is one piece that always gets a lot of attention, this bishop, because it's not a great piece. As you can already see, it is stuck behind those pawns over here, and it's really hard to see where you can develop it. Usually, we would like to trade off those bishops against each other, because white's bishop is just better. That's how it is. But in this very situation, this bishop doesn't really have many squares available. And on top of that, the bishop now has the opportunity to trade itself off against a knight. Now let me show you what happened. Bishop e7, bishop takes, pawn takes. You may think that this is very strange. Why was this played? Simply giving up the bishop pair for no reason? There is a reason. Now, as you can see, because my bishop is still on c8 and it has very little mobility, it's really hard to see how I can ever make use of this bishop, right? For, let's say, the next 5 moves. What do I do with my bishop? As I mentioned, usually you want to set up a position where you trade this bishop off for, let's say, one of those knights or the bishop that is gone now. What do you do then? So the idea behind this capture on c6 is simply that because the light squared bishop is gone, you are not going to trade this bishop off that easily. You're pretty much stuck with it. And that is the drawback here. Now, of course, the drawback for white is that they don't have the pair of bishops, and Black has quite a nice center, I have to say. So many pawns are very near the center, and those pawns are controlling many squares. It's really hard to see how white can actually infiltrate into black's position. So here my opponent went for the move c4, simply shutting down my pawns on the c file because they are weakened. Of course, I will not take on c4 because if I do, it ruins my pawn structure even more, and I already feel like mentally resigning, honestly. Apparently it's not so bad, but it feels, just positionally speaking, simply terrible. But okay, so c4 was played. I ignored this. I played short castle. My opponent played short castle. And here I went for the move f6. So this is a very common move in the French defense where you are attacking this pawn over here as it is controlling many squares. It is on your half of the board. So if we get rid of this, we will have much more space. Of course, getting rid of that pawn will not be happening that easily, but we have to try something, right? So here d3 was played, and here I started spending quite a lot of time. So my opponent has been playing pretty quickly, relatively speaking, spending 3 minutes max per move, something like that. And I was trying to figure out what works best. I took it very easily. And I was also very tempted by the fact that I can play the move d4. I think in this position, I spent around 15 to 20 minutes, and at least 10 minutes of those went into, do I play d4 here, yes or no? The reason why d4 is not a great move is because you're giving away the square e4. And you can see a knight jumping right there. And it feels like you're giving it up for no reason, more or less. Of course, I can play move f5, but the problem with shutting down a position like this is that it will be really difficult to open up the position, and those knights will be superior in close position. You will basically have to sit and wait until your opponent starts attacking on the king side, crushes all those pawns through your position, and there's not much you can do. The reason why I really wanted to play this, now, of course, I felt terrible about my bishop. I wasn't too happy about it. And deep inside me, I was like, I really want to give it back to my opponent that, you know, you made my bishop really bad over here. I want to make your bishop also really bad on b2. Of course, it's not really the same, but the bishop went to b2 for a reason, right? And if I shut this diagonal down, I feel very satisfied and I feel like I've done my job. I was very tempted, but I didn't do it eventually because of the reasons that I mentioned. I'm giving up a lot of important squares and there's not a lot I can do after that. And it's always important to keep the tension in the center. So whenever there is such a tension happening with pawns, it's oftentimes a really good idea to keep that tension because, of course, your opponent is not going to take on d5. My opponent will not take on d5 because I simply take back with the c pawn and I have an amazing position. I would happily go for this position. So after very long thought, I finally managed to disregard d4. I tried to shut it out of my head, shut it down, and I tried to look for other options. If not d4, what else do I have? I don't really have a lot of moves, I have to be honest with you. But I came up with this idea. G5! It's a very surprising move because it's very unusual, simply pushing a pawn in front of your king. And on top of that, you're weakening a lot of squares, you're weakening your pawn on f6. What is the idea behind this? So it's actually quite common in the French to play such a move as G5. Especially since this pawn is the main resource of this pawn. If I get rid of this pawn over here, then the pawn on e5 will automatically be much weaker. Of course, there's a knight and bishop defending it, but a pawn is one of the strongest defenders, right? Especially when a pawn is defending another pawn. So to get rid of this pawn, it will make my life so much easier. And if my opponent plays g3, I was actually considering to go g4 and simply crush on the king side, shut it down and continue this way. Apparently, Engine is not happy with this, but this was what I was thinking during the game. Now, my opponent was quite shocked. So I have to tell you about the situation here. So I finally managed to get up from my board because I thought now my opponent is going to spend some time. And I see a lot of people like see the board and be like, you know, you can see from their face that they're like, what is this move? Like, it's quite an unexpected move, I have to say. And you see my opponent just like visible confusion, like, what is that? He absolutely did not expect this. And it made me feel so happy because all this time he was playing pretty quickly. And then all of a sudden I faced him with this move that he did not expect whatsoever. Part of the reason why this move was possible, let me quickly go back a few moves, was because of the fact that my opponent has not played the move Queen E2. Let's show it right here. My opponent could have played move Queen E2. And the reason why this move is so strong is because it is putting pressure on this pawn on E6. So if I play, let's say I play the move G5 now, I will obviously lose my entire position here because E takes F6 will be played. And how do I defend this pawn on E6? The only way for me to defend this pawn is by playing knight takes F6 to open up the bishop. First of all, I lose a pawn over here. Second of all, even if I were not to lose this pawn, taking back with a knight, allowing another piece to jump on E5, it gives white so much activity. And I didn't want to allow this. So I knew that Queen E2 would have been a really strong move. And the fact that my opponent did not play the move Queen E2, but instead D3, it gave me a lot of confidence. I thought, I'm seeing the better moves than my opponent. And I know my opponent is playing really quickly. So this made me feel like that I need to take action right now. I need to do something. I need to make use of the fact that my opponent is not going for those very precise, accurate moves. What is a better way to sort of punish this than to play a provocative move like G5? What I really liked about playing this move is that my opponent had to sit down and calculate. He was not calculating a lot. And because of this reason, I really felt the urge and need to go G5 to put pressure on my opponent's position and yeah, force my opponent to calculate. And I thought I had a sort of edge here, not just mentally and psychologically, but okay, maybe on the board as well. Even though it was very risky, I felt confident in my chances. After not a very long thought, my opponent took on G5 and I thought, okay, I just take back on G5 because if I take on E5, I simply expose my king even more. I'm weakening my king a lot. I'm opening up the bishop over here. It's a terrible idea to take on E5. So I took on G5, of course. And here my opponent went for the move Queen E1. I wasn't entirely sure what the idea was behind Queen E1. I was guessing that Queen G3 was the idea to bring the queen towards the king side as my king side is pretty weakened. But also that if I play G4 now, he will be able to play Queen G3. So the pawn will be pinned and it's not so easy for me to play in this position. Specifically because it's hard to defend this pawn over here. I mean, I only have H5 and then H3 and this is very unpleasant for black. So instead I went for the move Queen E8. H3 was played to stop G4. Queen G6, I'm simply bringing over my queen to the king side because it feels really nice over here. And I'm also attacking the pawn on D3. So here my opponent wasted a move because, well, it has to defend the pawn now and you can basically only do it by moving the queen, so Queen E2. And because my opponent went from D1 to E1 and E2, it basically spent a tempo. If my opponent went Queen E2 here, it may have been the same, but with a tempo more, with a move more available. That's also one thing I realized during the game. Like, I know my opponent is not playing the most accurate moves. It sort of made me feel like my opponent is lower rated than me, but you will see more about that later. Rook F7 was played by me. I was sort of struggling to find an idea here. I desperately wanted to attack on the king side. I was so down to play H5, G4, and just crush it on the king side, but I was missing a couple of resources. I was missing pieces. I needed to activate my pieces somehow. And it was really tempting to start attacking right away on the king side. But I knew that sooner or later it would backfire me and I will be the one getting checkmated. So I knew that I had to activate my pieces. And the way to do it is, well, one of the ways is to move the rook, the knight of 8. And this bishop can slowly get out all the way to H5 or to g6. Now, of course, this will take a lot of time, but as you can see, what can white actually do? It's really hard to see what my opponent can do here. And my opponent's also lacking some development, right? Because the knight is not playing, the rook is not out yet. So I thought I had plenty of time, and let's get started with it right away. Knight c3 was played by my opponent, and here I go, knight f8. Now, after knight c3, I did realize that my opponent is actually looking for this pawn. My opponent will play knight a4, bishop a3, and I knew I would face some issues defending this pawn. But after rook ae1, I felt really happy and confident because once again, my opponent did not make the most accurate move. Rook ae1, I wasn't actually sure what the idea was behind this move, other than simply involving the rook in the game, I guess. But if my opponent would have played a move like knight a4, I may have faced some serious trouble here, as after knight a4, preparing the move bishop a3, I don't have the ability to play bishop d7 anymore because bishop a3, and how do I defend my pawn? It's very difficult to see. Now, if my bishop doesn't move to d7, of course I have knight d7 available, but now I don't. So that's why after rook ae1, I thought I have the time to play bishop d7. Bishop a3 was played, bishop e8, and now of course after knight a4, I can easily play knight to d7, so that's all fine. Here my opponent went for knight h2, which was a really good move, as it is pretty much discouraging me from playing h5. I don't really feel like playing this move anymore because once I play h5, g4 will be played and the king side will also be sort of shut down. And this knight is a really strong defender. At the same time, the knight is jumping to g4. So in this position, I wasn't super sure what to do, whether I should be playing h5 to stop that or to simply ignore it and face whatever happens. At the same time, I was also looking forward to activate my pieces. So I played with queen g7 with the idea that I either managed to play knight g6, knight f4, or I put my bishop on g6 or h5. And I still have a lot of flexibility over here. So I thought I'll see what my opponent does. And based on that, I'll decide which one is better. My opponent went for knight a4 right away. So I thought here is the time to actually take on f1. And I was surprised by the move queen takes f1. I really thought rook takes f1 was going to be played. But for some reason, my opponent went for this line. And I played knight d7 now because my pawn is under attack on c5. So we're now on move 22. I'm about to make... Okay, my opponent is about to make the 22nd move. I believe I had a few minutes on the clock. It was pretty rough for me. Meanwhile, my opponent had, I think, like, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes or something like that. My opponent had crazy time advantage. He was playing, I wouldn't say he was pre-moving IRL, but I don't think he spent more than 5 minutes on a single move. Okay, I think the maximum was like 8 minutes, but that was just one time, I think. But my opponent was playing generally really quickly. On the one hand, my opponent playing quickly like this was very intimidating, and it gave me a lot of pressure because, yeah, I couldn't really sit down and calculate. Every single time I made a move, I barely had time to think during my opponent's time. I was only able to catch a breath once it was my opponent's turn. Now, with this in mind, I was pretty low on the clock, so I was really happy to go for some trades, and I knew it was coming already here, because my opponent is simply planning to play knight g4 and knight f6, so I sort of knew what was ahead of me. He played the move knight g4 indeed, and after bishop g6 attacking the pawn on d3, I knew that my opponent was playing knight f6, because if my opponent doesn't do anything here, I simply have rook f8, h5, and slowly but surely, I will start launching an attack on the king side. So here my opponent went for the move knight f6. We traded off almost everything. And in this position, it was still very interesting to see if bishop takes c5 was a good idea. The reason why I'm mentioning this move is because bishop takes c5 check. I'm not losing the queen, don't worry. Knight takes c5, queen d4 check is met by queen f2. So I'm not really winning any sort of material. I may actually be worse here because this knight is super strong. My pawns are quite shaky. And yeah, I can actually not attack this knight whatsoever. So that is pretty sad. So I really expected my opponent to go for something like this. Especially because once your opponent has a pair of bishops, you want to get rid of one of those bishops at any cost, almost. So my opponent went for queen takes f6, and I was really happy about this because let's go to the end game. The more we trade, the less pieces there are on the board, the less complicated it gets, right? It's good for me in time trouble. So rook takes e6, bishop d4 check is all very straightforward. King h2, I take the pawn d3 because why not? C takes d5. My opponent takes on d5 first because if my opponent will take on c6, I guess there's d takes c4 and maybe not very pleasant and ideal. Yeah, I actually always have d takes c4. For example, after knight takes c5, there's also d takes c4 because after knight takes, pawn takes, this pawn is going really quickly forward. So after c takes d5, c takes d5, my opponent took with the knight, which I was pretty surprised by because I thought, to me, it was very obvious that bishop takes c5 is just better, simply to trade off those bishops. And even though my bishop is super strong, I feel like this knight will come back into the game and white will have a much easier time playing here. So I was super surprised that my opponent went for knight takes c5 because hell no, I'm not going to take that knight. I'm going to keep my bishops, of course, if I can. So I bring the bishop back. Of course, rook d6 is not possible because of bishop e5 check, simply losing the rook. So the rook had to retreat. Now rook c8, I'm attacking the knight, and I want to infiltrate somehow into white's position. One of the reasons why I wasn't able to is because of this rook on e2. It's defending the second rank. And it's really hard to see how I can actually access white's position. So my opponent went for the move b4, of course. It is not very appealing to me to capture here, so I want to keep the bishops on the board as much as possible. I bring the king in the game because the king wasn't doing anything there. Knight b3, I simply retreat with the bishop, bishop b2, and slowly but surely white is able to consolidate here. The pieces are now a bit better placed, are not very awkward anymore on the edge of the board, and they're actually stopping me from playing the move d4, which is really disturbing. I was really low on the clock over here. We're on move 33, and I believe I was already playing on seconds over here. I had around 1 minute on the clock. So bishop e4 was played by me, simply centralizing and making sure I don't drop the bishop somehow, or I lose this pawn in a miraculous way. I don't know. You start to see ghosts when you're low on the clock, let's put it that way. And my opponent played move a3 here, and I started to slowly regret the fact that I wasn't really trying to make progress. Like, I was just placing my pieces on good squares, but I had no clear plan. It's really hard to create plans when you're really low on the clock. And I thought, I mean, what can go wrong, right? Because I have the pair of bishops. I'm the one dominating this position. What can ever go wrong? So I went for h5, simply trying to fix the pawn structure on the king side, as, yeah, there may be some problems here for white. Bishop d4 was played by my opponent, simply offering a trade. And as I mentioned before, you simply don't really want to trade bishops when you have the pair of bishops. The power of the bishop pair lays in the fact that they can work together. It's big teamwork. And I thought, now this is the perfect position to have this teamwork actually, you know, be used in practice. Like, look at this board, look at the position. The position is so open, the bishops have so much access to so many squares, and why would I ever trade bishops here? So I played with bishop c7 check, and king g1 was played, and here bishop g3, because I thought, I'm going to checkmate you. I'm going to stop you from moving forward with the king. And after bishop takes a7, I come in with the rook, and your knight has to go, and it's GG, go next. However, what I did miss was the move rook e3. I had no idea that this move was even possible. It did not cross my mind whatsoever. It was really like a huge blow for me because I thought, wait, now I'm forced to trade pieces, and on top of that, I'm down a pawn already. I sacrificed a pawn on a7 just so I could kick out this knight over here and infiltrate into white's position, only to face rook e3. I was devastated. This was move 38, and I was like, no, God, no, I'm throwing. In this position, let's go back. What can ever go wrong here, right? What can go wrong here? And I managed to find pretty much the only way to lose the advantage, and on top of that, also end up in a losing position. It couldn't get any worse, right? Of course, looking back in hindsight, it makes so much sense to capture on d4. Not only because of the time situation, just so I trade and get a quick, nice, easy position where it's basically risk-free. It's really hard to lose there. Because once I lose this pawn at a7, those pawns are getting really scary. And I missed quite a few opportunities to try to improve my position in this endgame. But once again, the time triple was really the end of me here. After this, everything went downhill as much as it possibly could go wrong. Bishop d3. I, of course, don't want to trade rooks. Like, I thought if I trade rooks, look at that. I mean, those pawns, ugh, monsters. And guess what? Who is going to play d4 ever again? Not me. So I thought if I trade rooks, I'm definitely going to lose. And there's no way to stop those pawns. So that's when I thought, okay, I have to find something. And with seconds on the clock, I found bishop d3, still keeping myself sort of in the game, I guess. But after rook takes g3, rook takes b3, I quickly realized I'm losing all my pawns. What a convenient way to lose all my pawns over here. I couldn't believe my eyes seeing the pawns disappear because I thought, like, why did I play h5? Why did I do this to myself? Why did I not do this? Why did I not just take on d4? And I was just mentally already lost. Bishop e4, the 14th move, but I knew that I'm just going to lose this game. There's no way for me to catch up with my opponent here because my opponent is snatching all those pawns off the board. In the meantime, I'm down 3 pawns. Fortunately, I have rook takes a3, bishop c5, and rook g3, so I'm able to capture 2 pawns back, but that doesn't solve my problem at all here in the position. I have a huge problem here, being that who's going to stop this pawn? Who's going to either stop this pawn or this pawn? I mean, either this one will run or this one, and I don't know how to deal with them. The king comes now forward. I take on g2, king e3, and you can just not stop this king altogether. And at some point, the checks also run out, right? Like, if I, for example, give a check on g3, the king will move forward, rook f3, king e5, and I might as well resign here. I mean, like, once the king is getting there, ugh, that doesn't seem like I'm ever going to survive this. So, yeah, I didn't really know how to approach this position. I literally just thought I'm lost already. So I played bishop g6, rook h8, king e6. And here my opponent starts marching the pawn forward. Rook g3, I mean, king f4, rook b3, b6. And yeah, I'm just playing some moves here as I'm really clueless what to do. I'm trying my best to hold the position together, but it's just simply impossible to me. The king is infiltrating. It gets on e5, bishop g2. I'm literally like on my knees. Please give me this pawn, please. Of course, my opponent's not going to give me that. So h4, and yeah, king c6, rook c7. I don't have really moves. By the way, I was considering for a brief moment to play rook b5, but after rook h7, king c6, this is checkmate. Imagine if I would have lost like this. I think I would have been pretty embarrassed. So I'm sort of glad that I found out that that's checkmate. I was like, what? I don't have a single square there available. So I play rook b1, trying to, I guess, you know, have a check-in on e1 at some point. I don't know. Rook h7, king c6, rook c7, king b5, bishop d4, rook e1 check, king d6. I mean, I'm just playing some moves and refusing to resign because I'm like, how could I have lost this? How could I lose this game? b7, rook e6, and I'm just going to play this out real quick because there's not much to mention about this sequence of moves. And after rook f7 here, I thought it was time to resign. I have to note, I think I was already playing on seconds over here again. Because I was still spending quite some time even after move 40. But yeah, I resigned here and I lost my game. I was during the game like devastated. I thought, no, I should never have lost this game. And to make matters even worse, I forgot to mention this, but during the game, my opponent offered a draw, and I declined it. And, I mean, one can argue that, why did you not accept the draw? Like, at least you wouldn't have lost the game. But here is my theory. Let me go back to the moment that my opponent offered a draw. So, my opponent offered a draw here, on move 33. Bishop b2 was played. And I had, like, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes on the clock. And I thought, I mean, I have a great position. My opponent offers a draw. And I thought, no, no, no. In no way I'm going to accept this draw. And in hindsight, despite losing the game, I'm super proud of myself for not accepting it. I mean, okay, I did think that my opponent was lower rated, so I also thought that I'm just going to beat my opponent very easily. But besides that, I really thought that if I accept a draw here, it feels very unsatisfying. Like, I am a fighter. I don't want to go for a draw. I mean, I'm not going for a norm. I'm playing here to learn and to win a rating and to win my game. But I don't want to go for a draw. I don't feel like going for a draw, and I'm really confident about my position. And if I would have accepted a draw here, yes, I would have saved rating. But would I have ever learned how to deal with this position? And would I have ever learned my lesson that perhaps trading on d4 is okay? Like, I learned so much by simply declining this draw offer. Of course, you always learn it the hard way. When you lose, that's when you start learning. But not accepting this draw actually made me feel like I won so much more. Like, we don't care about the loss anymore. We don't care about the fact that I just threw an amazing position. We care about the fact that I managed to play this position, even though I had like very little time on the clock. I learned that I should play faster, and that has a lot to do with my confidence. I should trust myself more. I should trust that my opponent may not just know what they're doing. Afterwards, in the analysis, we analyzed the game together, and I really had this feeling that my opponent was just playing whatever. He was not really calculating. He was playing just like a random opening, and he just wanted to play a game. But at the same time, I felt like I was the better player, and I was making more accurate moves than him. Seeing my opponent's rating afterwards, I was really happy because, you know, I feel like a 2100, and I felt like I was doing better than my opponent. So I'm automatically sort of thought that my opponent is lower rated than me. But knowing that I'm able to play against people around 2300 rated, knowing that I can actually keep up with them and simply outplay them, made me really feel confident. I was like, wait a second, I played at 2300 and I outplayed this person. I had such an amazing position. I completely caught him off guard with the move g5, and I got in such a nice position. I even made him offer a draw. You have to see it this way. Imagine like someone a couple of 100 points higher rated than you, or even like just slightly better than you, that offers you a draw. That is most of the times because they're afraid. They're afraid to lose. They don't want to lose. Unfortunately, it was not enough for the game to be won by me, but I did learn that perhaps I should trust myself a bit more. Of course, I learned whatever happened in the game, what I could have done better. But the most important part is, confidence is such a big thing in chess. The reason why I made this video is to show you guys that chess is not all about winning. Sometimes losses can actually mean so much more than winning your games. Of course, winning is fun. Winning is what chess makes fun, right? But what is most important is that you trust yourself. No matter who your opponent is, if they're a few 100 points higher than you, a few 100 points lower than you, believe in yourself. We all make very silly mistakes that we're like, how could I have ever done this? But that's where we start learning. And had I had this confidence that I have right now, I would have played so much faster. I would have made other decisions, better decisions, and the game result may have been very different. I hope this video inspired you to continue with chess, to try to reach your goals despite having perhaps lots of setbacks or confidence issues. I hope you find the confidence you deserve and crush your opponents in your next games. Before I end this video, I want to quickly share that I will be playing in an over-the-board tournament in roughly a month. So the next month I will be preparing for this tournament, and I will be focusing a lot on my chess. I'll be studying a lot off stream and on stream. But if you want to know anything about my process of trying to study for my chess tournament, if you're interested in perhaps a video about this, let me know down below in the comments what you would love to see. And of course, I would also love to hear what you thought of this video and if you feel inspired to continue playing chess and crush your next opponent. More on my OTB tournament on my stream or later in a future video perhaps. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.